Hello and welcome back to Python for Biologists. What I want to do in this example is to actually take some examples directly from our textbook and go through those. I've done a lot of examples I make up on my own, but let's look at those that are directly out of Chapter 6 in the textbook. So let's start by looking at the if statement with the additional clauses, the else if and the else clause. So I'm going to paste in the example. And in this example, there are two files that are being used. So we're going to open one, and it's just called one.txt. The other one is called two.txt. And now this is kind of a review for files. I suppose we haven't done those in a while. But if you want to write to a file, then you have to use the W mode over here. And recall that if we use the W mode, it overwrites any existing file that has the same name. So this will be convenient because we'll run the program several times and we don't want to keep appending to the file. We just want to make a new file each time. Okay, so accessions, we have those listed, and those again are just example, or is an example straight out of the book. So we're going to use that. Now, we're going to investigate the if statement again, but we're going to start with a for loop, and we're going to go through all the accessions here. So let's put the for loop here. So we'll paste that in. And we're going to do for accession in ACCS, so that's just the list here. So we'll pick out each element of the list, we'll go through it, and we'll analyze each one of the elements. I'm going to add a little extra to the example because let's put the example in first. Let me go ahead and get the whole thing here, and I'll copy and I'll paste it, and I'll show you what I'm adding in. Okay, so the textbook, it doesn't have these print statements here, so let's take those out temporarily. And it just has, if accession is in ACCS, then we'll check to see if it begins with an A. If it does, we're going to write it out to file number 1. If it starts with anything else, we'll write it out to file number 2. But I wanted to be able to track this better as we're going through the loop, so I put these print statements in here. So I'm going to put those back in, and we'll have some information that pops up on the screen this time instead of having to wait and go look at the file. But we'll look at the file too. The other thing is this. The starts with function or method, that kind of cropped up without warning and in the textbook. So I wanted to show you that really does return a true or a false as a result. So I'm going to print that out. So I'm just going to print out accession dot starts with and then the letter A. So if the accession does start with an A, then that print statement will print out true. Otherwise, it prints out false. So that's just verifying that this method, this starts with method, returns true or it returns false. Then we have the if accession starts with an A. I want to print that to the screen too. Okay, so I want to print that out. And I'm also going to note that the print statement is located in the if part of our if statement. So it's in the upper part here. And otherwise, if the accession is something different than an A, then the print statement will print out the accession here from the else part. So these print statements help to clearly identify where the print statement's coming from, and it identifies whether we're executing the code below the else or if we're executing the code below the if. Okay, so remember, if the statement following the if that's true, then we do the code immediately below it, and we do not do anything else. It skips over the bottom part. If this part turns out to be false, then we do not do this section of code. We do jump down, we execute the else part. So the else part is done if it's false, the other part's done if it's true. Now, since we're dealing with files, we do need to go ahead and close those, otherwise we won't be able to see the contents. So I'm going to add that in here too, so that's not actually included in the book, but we need it to make that work. So here's the first example. And let's run the program and let's look at the output that we get. I'll bring over the output window, and we have all the information printed out here. All right, so let's move this up a little bit, and we can go through this. Okay, so the first accession is AB56. So when I print that out, okay, I do this print statement here, then we do get the word true. Okay, so it does start with an A, so the starts with function returns true. That's what I'm printing out. That means that we are going to do the if part of the if statement. So this gets executed, and we get the output that you see here. Okay, we do the if part, and we print out AB56. We do not do the else part. That isn't done at all, but we do go back to the top of the for loop, and we get the next item, the next accession, which will be BH84. Okay, so we're going to move across this list with the for loop, and we're going to test each one with the if statement. Well, the second one starts with a B, so you can see here that the starts with function returns false. That means we're going to go down and we're going to execute the code in the else part of the if statement. So that's what's printed out here. Okay, from the else part, we print out the BH84. Okay, the next one starts with the H, HV76. Okay, we are back at the top of the loop, and we pull out the accession, the third one, HV76, and it does not start with an A, so we get false there. And from the else part of the if statement that's still highlighted over there, we print out the accession, HV76. So you see what's happening. Then we go back to the top of the loop. We get AY93 next, starts with an A, so we get true there. So we execute the code that's in the if part. Okay, so we're back up here this time. All right, so we execute that code. And then this will continue until we get through all of the elements that's in the list ACCS. So that's how this works. So we have the if clause here, and we have the else. We have the if statement, I should say, and we have the else clause there as part of the if statement. All right, now continuing with the examples from the textbook, let's look at the other one. And these are separate programs in the textbook, but I'm just going to put them all together in one program. Before we go on, though, let's go look at those files. Okay, we made a couple of files here. So one file will have all the accessions that start with A. The other file will have the ones that start with everything else. So the purpose of this little loop then would be to separate out the accessions that are A's from all the rest. So let's go look at those files. So here is the file. I opened it up. So here is file number 1, and it contains all the accessions that start with A. So we have the AB56, AY93, AP97. So that is file 1.txt. All right, well, let's look at the other one. So we'll open it up as well, and I'll bring it over. And here you can see that we have the accessions that do not begin with A. So we have separated those out from this list into two separate files. So that was the function then of this little program that we have here. Now, let's move on to the second example. So I will get the code for that. So we'll put the example number 2 right here. So I'm just going to print to the screen that we're working example number 2, and this one has 3 files. Okay, so it's called 1.txt, 2.txt, 3.txt. They're all write mode, so we'll overwrite every time. And just to keep this definition of this list handy, I'm going to go ahead and include it here as well. Once we've done it once in our program, of course, we don't need to do it over and over again, but it just keeps it handy so we can look at it when we're going through the example that we're about to do here. So we will start out pretty much the same way we did before. So we're going to go through the list. So let's put the for loop here. So for accession in ACCS, if it starts with an A, then I'll print to the screen, it starts with an A, and then we'll write it to file number 1. Then we have the else part already located down here. This time, if it's something that doesn't start with an A, I want to check to see what it does start with. So under the else clause, I'm going to put another if statement. So I'll put that in here, and I have to indent again. So let's look at the indentation. The for loop contains everything here. All of that's in the for loop. Underneath the for loop, we have an if statement, so everything here is in the if statement. The top part of the if contains that code, and the else part contains everything down below. So the else clause, not the else lodge, the else clause is going to contain another if statement, and it has an else clause to go with it. So now it might be confusing to figure out what code goes with this else, what code goes with that one. But let's read it anyway. This is what we call a nested if statement. We have an if statement inside another one, so it's nested. So the idea here is if it starts with an A, this will be true. We'll write it to file number 1 and to the screen. If it starts with anything else, then we're going to check to see what goes on there. So if it's anything else, then we're going to see if it starts with a B. Well, if it does, then I'll print that to the screen and write it to file number 2. If it's anything else, then I'm going to print out it starts with something else, and I'll print it, and that will go to file number 3. So we're breaking up this list into 3 different files, but the way we're doing it is through this structure of the if statement. If it's A, we do that. If it's anything else, we do this. But as part of that anything else, we're going to specifically test to see if it starts with a B, and then anything else would be printed to file number 3. All right, I still need to close the files if we want to see the contents. So I am going to go ahead and copy and paste those close statements in here. So let's plop those down. And let's run our program again. I'll bring over the output. So we're adding on to what we already had. So the top part of this just shows what we just went through in example number 1. And now we're moving down to example number 2. So you can see all the code here that goes with that. So we will go through the list again, and if it starts with an A, then I'm going to print it out. Starts with an A, AB56. And then we do not do anything else. Okay, so this part was true. So I execute these 2 lines of code, but I don't do any of this because it was true at the top. If accession starts with an A, that's true. So we only do those 2 lines. We don't do anything under the else. Now, we go back and we get the next element from the list, BH84. Well, that isn't going to start with an A, so this would be false, and we'll go down to the else part. Under the else part now, we're going to test to see if it starts with a B. And if it does, we do this code. If it doesn't, we do the bottom code. All right, so now let's look at that output. So you can see, starts with a B, BH84. So I am going to be doing printing out this part right here. Okay, starts with a B. So since this was true, right, this if statement was true, then we do this code, but we don't do anything else. So the else here belongs to that if. All right, so this being true, we do that. This being false, we do this. Now the other if statement at the very beginning, okay, this if, its else is this one right here. So this else goes with that if. So if this thing is true, we do that. If it isn't, we do the whole thing down here, which also involves another if statement. Okay, not confusing at all, is it? Now, let's look at the output and finish that up. Let me click to remove the gray part there. I don't like the gray. And we'll bring this back up and we can go through the rest of the loop. The third item, HV76, that doesn't start with an A, doesn't start with a B. So I print out it starts with something else, HV76. So in this case, we fail the first if statement right there. So that's false. So then we go down here. Then this if statement under the else, that's false as well. It does not start with a B. So we end up doing the code at the very bottom. It starts with something else. We write it to file number 3. Then we continue to go through the rest of the list, and I won't go through that in detail. You know what happens. Okay, the next 2 start with an A, the next one starts with a B. So we separate those out. And in the end, we will have 3 separate files. So if it starts with an A, it goes to file 1. If it starts with a B, it goes to file 2. All the others go to file number 3. So let's look at those outputs. So let's bring over 1.txt. So that one still has the accessions that start with A, and you see them here. Then let's look at the others. Number 2, bring over file number 2, then it contains the accessions that start with B. We have 2 of those. And file number 3 will have all the rest. All right, so there's only one of those, right? So HV76. So this program, it breaks up the list into 3 different files. Okay, so let's move those. But this example is kind of hard to read because you have this else that goes with this if, you have that else that goes with this one. So there's an easier way for us to write this, and I'm going to show you that now. So I'm not going to start over with a brand new example because this is really easy to fix. So if we take this if statement that's below the else, and I'm just going to backspace here. I'm going to backspace, and I'm going to make that an elif. That's an else if statement. Then I need to make this match up. I'm going to move that else over there. All right. So by using the else if clause of your if statements, then you can line things up better, and it makes it less confusing. It makes it easier to debug, and it is really the same thing. So all languages have this kind of feature. There's an else if in every language that I'm aware of, and syntactically it's written different in different languages, and in most it's literally the words else if instead of this contraction here. And I kind of wish they just taken out the I and made an elf there, but they didn't, so we'll leave the elif in here. All right, well, anyway, in this case, if it starts with an A, that's true. We do that part, and we don't do anything else. Okay, if it's false, then we'll check the next thing. Okay, so we'll do the else if statement. If it starts with a B, we'll do that one, and we won't do anything else. If both of those are false, okay, if this one up here, if that comes back false, and if that one comes back false, then we do the else statement. That's kind of the catch-all. If everything above is false, then we do the else part. So this is a little neater way of writing that. And I'm going to, even though I think this works just fine with this double indent here, as long as the indents are the same, then it should work just fine. But I'm going to back it up a tab just to line this code up with all the other code. All right. So we have to be very careful about our indentations. So now we have the same thing for example number 2. So I'm going to run the program and make sure that it works. So it did work, and here's this very same output. So it does exactly the same thing, but if you're trying to read the code, then this is a much simpler and better organized version of the if statement. So with the if, you have these 3 possibilities then. You always have to have if. Then you can have an else if statement, and you can have as many of these as you want, including 0. But if you have the else clause, you can only have one of those. It goes at the bottom, and it will do, it executes if everything above it is false. Okay, so let's look at the output one more time. And you can see this is the very same output that I got previously, the same stuff here. Now, let's move on to another example. We also created these files. All right, I'm not going to show you the files again, but we did create file 1, 2, and 3 here. But they look exactly the same, so I'm not going to show them to you again. Now, let's look at another way that we can use this else if clause. I'm going to paste in the entire example, and it is shown here. So here's example 3, and I'm just skipping a couple of lines. I'm writing out example 3, then I'm skipping another line here. That's what that does. So I'm going to go through all of those accessions again. And this time I'm going to check to see if they begin with a variety of letters. And I'm not going to print to a file this time. And the textbook example does, but it's cumbersome to keep opening up those files, so I'm just going to print this to the screen instead. So we will take a accession from our list. I'm not reproducing it here. It's the same list. And we'll test it. Okay, so does it start with an A? If so, we do that. Does it start with a B? Well, if it does, then we'll do that. Does it start with a C? If so, it does this. So you can select a number of things and do a number of tests in sequence using the else if. Okay, so I've got several of those in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 of them. So I can check for the letters A, B, C, D, and E. And if none of those are true, if those are all false, then I'll print out it starts with something else. Okay, now let's run the program again, and let's look at the output from example number 3. So we have the output from example number 3, and we have the accessions that start with an A printed out, or with anything really. So the first case, we have one that starts with an A, we print that out. We have one that starts with a B, we print that out. And then the next one that comes along, it started with an H. Okay, so I didn't have a test for that. I just did A, B, C, D, E. I didn't test for H. So we have print, it starts with something else. It comes up here, all right? Then the rest of them start with either A or a B, so we just detect those and print them out. All right, so that's how you can use the if with the else if sequence, and then the else as a terminator, as a catch-all at the end. It's important to realize that only one of these things will be done. Okay, let me repeat that. Okay, only one of these choices, okay, A through E, only one of those can be done. So I can't test for multiple things if I want to use this. Let's say, for example, I wanted to test to see if the accession had an A and it had the number 5 or something like that. Well, as soon as I detect an A, then the if statement exits at this point. Okay, we don't look at anything below that. All of these tests are not done. As soon as something is true, we skip everything below it. So please be aware of that if you're using this structure. Now, I'm going to investigate that a little bit further with the next example, and I'm going to use my own example to show you that. And the one in the textbook I didn't think was as clear as hopefully this one's going to be. So let's take a look then at another example to point out the limitations then of the else if. So we'll start with example number 4, and I'm going to use states, but to make it really simple, my list is will only contain one state, North Carolina. So I have the for loop, so let's get some space for that. So for state in the list states, then I'm going to do something down here. And we want to check for multiple things. All right, so let's suppose we want to check to see if the state begins with the letter N, and let's suppose we want to check to see if the length is greater than 10. And let's suppose we want to check to see if it contains the letter R. Okay, we have 2 of those in there. So we want to do several things. Let's try to do that with our else if statement. So I'm going to put the if statement here. I'll copy it from my notes and paste it in here. So let's look at our if statement with our else if sequence. Okay, so if the state starts with an uppercase N, then I'll print out it starts with an N. Else, if the state is equal to New York, I'll print out that it's New York. Else, if the length is greater than 10, it doesn't contain 10 or more letters, there's an equal sign right there, then I'll print out that the length is greater than or equal to 10. And I'm going to check to see if there are any letter R's, lowercase. I'll use the count method. And if I count 1 or more, then I'll print out that it contains these. So that's what I want to do. Okay, I want to check for all those things. But when I run the program, you'll see that it does not give me the result that I wanted. So I'll go ahead and run the program, and we'll look at the output. So let's bring that right on over. And here is example number 4. Okay, that's the one we're doing. I printed out example 4. So I get starts with N, and I get North Carolina. Well, that is from the first if statement. Okay, if it starts with an N, I want to print out starts with N and give it the state. That is true. It does start with an N, so this if statement is true. Because this one is true, it doesn't do any of those other tests. The first one that it finds that's true, it goes ahead and executes that one. It ignores all the others. So if I wanted to test for all those things, then I cannot use this else if sequence. I have to use an if instead of an else if everywhere here. So let's revise that, and I'm going to just do another example. I'll call it number 5 here, and I'll paste that in, and I have converted it to whoops, I got the wrong thing. Let me go back and get the correct one. All right, so we'll put the correct one here. Now this is example 5, and now I have 4 consecutive simple if statements. So that's an if, followed by an if for the state of New York, followed by an if for the length, and then finally followed by a if to count the number of R's. So when you write it like this, all of those if statements will be executed. It'll make all 4 tests. So let's run the program to show that. So here, oops, I've got an indentation problem. Now, it's good actually that we have this because the indentation problem just crops up over and over again. I did a copy and paste. So whenever you do a copy and paste, this is likely to happen. So I am going to need to make sure my alignments are all perfectly correct. This is the most aggravating part of Python. So I'm going to erase everything over here to the left, and then I'm going to replace it with tabs. So this is quite annoying. This wouldn't happen in most other languages. Okay, so here is, let's go past the print. And now I'm going to have to indent each of my if statements. I'm going to place a tab there, there's a tab, here's a tab, there's a tab. Okay, so now these are all hopefully lined up correctly. So let's try this again. We'll run, and it does work. Yay, whoops. Now there's something else going on here. It's good actually that you do see my errors. We all make errors, and sometimes I don't record them, but I do make them all the time. So let's try to find this one. The thing is here, I've got the parentheses in the wrong place. Okay, so let's take that off, and the count has the parentheses around it, not at the end of the word there. So we'll put the closing paren there, and now the count is written correctly, the method count. So one more time, let's run the program, and I hope this works. And this time it does. So if we look at the output this time, then here's example number 5. So that's the last one. And come back, please. There you are. So now we can test for all those multiple things. Okay, does it start with an N? Yes. Okay, so we get North Carolina. So we did get that one. If state's equal to New York, well, it isn't New York, so we don't print out New York. But now we test to see if the length of the name is greater than or equal to 10. And it is for North Carolina, so this comes out. And then we're looking for the state to, does it contain an R? Well, we know it does. It has 2. So we're going to print out the state contains the letter R. And there you have it. State contains the letter R. So beware. If you want to do multiple tests on a string, or if you want to make multiple examinations of things, it's better to use just a simple if statement. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can have as many of these as you want. I'll separate them out to kind of show you that these are separate if statements. You would use this else if sequence only when you have a situation where only one of those can be correct. So for example, if we're testing the day of the week and we want to put in a number 1 through 7, then we can only have one possibility for that. So else if works okay. But if we wanted to put in a day of the week and we wanted to do additional tests on that week, then we need to do just regular if statements. So this brings you even further into the world of the conditional statement, and now you've seen all of the parts of it. We have the if, we have the else if that you can use, as many of them as you like, and at the end you can put an else, which is a catch-all if everything above it is false. So there you have it. That will be enough for this video. So let's stop talking about conditionals for a while. We'll stop here.